Recording. And Marty, there's Chris Dustin. And
Good
Chris,
afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon.
there's Marty. Chris is the inheritor of the revenues who is learning a great deal about them as time goes on.
As time goes on.
So, without further ado, I will start today's program. And there we are. This is postal history only of the sower, although you'll see some other stuff. I essentially put it in what I call calendar order. It wasn't in any particular order in how it came to me. I wasn't going to try and turn it into a stamp exhibit and tell a story from beginning to end. There are a couple of places where I put related things to next to each other in the program, even though the dates may have been further apart, but not very much of that. So it's really a catalog of Jan's postal history, and there's some interesting stuff and some boring stuff, I'll have to say. This just didn't fit anywhere. He has about 20 perfins with notes just stuck on a page. You can see the first one on the left is folded in the middle, so they weren't all great quality. The one in the middle, the EB, has short perfs, but it was one part of sower collecting that he added to with his and put in his album. This one I discovered and realized it probably should have been in the postal stationery stuff, but it was stuck in another file. So it's the memo surcharge, and I want to say it was surcharged twice. I'm not positive of that, but this is the first one, surcharge in pfennigs. I should add too, for anybody who's on the call, if you have any questions, you want me to slow down and look at something, by all means, just speak up and we'll do that. I thought it appropriate to start off with the first day of rate, which I think I took out of his other album and put in here a second time. The rate went to 10 centimes for ordinary letters, local or within country, on April 16th. 1906, and here it is. This one is undated, so I'm sorry, it's undated on the face. You can see a manuscript cancel tying it to the envelope. We don't know where it came from, but it's the grounded sower stamp. You can see the sower walking on the visible ground, but there was a CDS on the back that told me it was mailed June 16th or perhaps a day before. When you see words like uncommon and rare and so on, I've lifted those from Jan's descriptions. I am no expert on this material, so I trusted his knowledge, which turned out not always to be a good thing. So here's a label that says unknown addressee. The audos is to turn it over and send it back. So we don't know who the addressee actually was. The post office didn't know who it was. And again, it's the grounded sower. Those are a lot less common than the ones issued thereafter with no ground, like these. Here's a postcard written in Dieppe, mailed to London, and it may have been mailed on the ship as it was crossing the channel because it's got a British cancel and not a French cancel on the stamp. It's also possible that this was written on board a ship called the Dieppe and not the town, but you do see the reference to Dieppe in the upper left corner. This is an experimental machine cancel used in Paris on a postcard sent to Lynn, Massachusetts, of all places. It's the retouched thin line issue, and you can see that because it's the words République Française are almost illegible at the top of the stamp. There are 2 receipt marks on here from Lynn and West Lynn, which I thought was pretty interesting. And it's not really an official card. It's just printed to look like an official card because no French postcard, postal stationery item, would have a USA pre-printed on it. And especially not USA, it would be EUA, right? Here's the message side, again, pre-printed. It's announcing the shipment of some hats to the United States, inviting the customer to come see all these new fashions in Boston somewhere around the middle of September in 1907. So that was the whole purpose of mailing the card from France. This is a letter card mailed to Alsace, and they're just uncommon. You see them used, but because it was not within France at this point, the sender had to put 25 centimes postage on instead of just 10 centimes for within country use. This was an example of a maritime cancel. Any of us who collect this era recognize the octagon. This one's Marseille, Yokohama, which is a very nice cancel. The picture of the desert and the camel doesn't go very well with a ship out on the ocean, but it's still a pretty cool postcard. Here was an envelope mailed to Luther Burbank, which was the reason that Jan acquired it. Mailed from the Russian consulate, of all things, to Santa Rosa, which was where Luther spent much of his academic career. We don't know who was being mourned. There's no contents, and unfortunately, the cover is trimmed on the right, or we would have had another black border on it. I will say that Jan was not a person who focused a lot on quality. He just liked what he liked and bought it. So you'll see things like the trimmed envelope. So now we've got a suburban Paris cover to Baden-Württemberg, backstamped by Kirschbein. So it did get there. And then it came back with this German, we don't know, or insufficient address label on the front of it. This postcard was just an oversized card. I think he liked the picture. And it's a picture of the town itself where the card was canceled and handed back. This is a train station cancel, I do believe. Yeah. And it was mailed to Philadelphia, which is pretty cool. Only cost 10 centimes to do that. It's written in English, and the person is saying there, thanks very much for your postcard. My military service is finished today. Very glad of it. That had to feel pretty good in 1908. May 1909, another train station cancellation from Bourges to Philadelphia again. It may have been to the same person. I just don't remember. This, this was during a postal strike. So these are not really postal cancels. They are Chamber of Commerce cancels because they took over the mail service during the postal strike. He had one full envelope, and then he had a group of pieces with the cancels and the stamp. Unfortunately, yeah, here's a selection of them. He didn't have the entire cover, which as postal historians, those of us who are, would much rather see than just the little slips of paper with the stamp and the cancel. But he has a bunch of these. There's another group. And all of this because of the postal strike in 1909. Oops, that should say number 4 at the top. So lots of them. Here is an odd cancellation on a essentially a packy boat cancel on a ship on its way from Bombay to France. We don't know where. I didn't bother to try and track it down. A nice picture of not the Taj Mahal itself, but the Taj Mahal Hotel in Bombay, India. And then a very odd cancel, that rectangular cancel. And there's the message side of the card, hand-stamped packy boat, so we know it was mailed aboard the ship. And the hand stamp next to it says, carried by French steamer, Bombay, October 6, 1909. November 1909. This one probably was mailed on shipboard from South America back to France. And it has the Buenos Aires Maritime cancel on the stamp itself. Now this card he liked because he blown up the detail that was stuck on the page this postcard was on. And he was pointing out that despite there being 2 cancels on here, there were 2 different ones. There are different sizes, and he identifies the differences in the cancel as well, which I thought was interesting. But you can see that 27 is different, particularly. 1911, a nice railway parcel. I looked up the towns, Lagarde and Le Pradé, and they are very close to each other on the map. So this parcel didn't go very far. And it was pretty clear from the receipt that the parcel arrived the next day. Again, you can see this has a stamp hinge stuck on it to hold it together because of this pre-World War I paper, but all these parcel receipts were printed on a really crappy paper, and now 110 or 115 years later, it's already falling apart. Worse than newsprint. This was a very neat postcard. It seems to be tours local use. The cancel is not clear, but these postcards with biplanes on them are very collectible. Anybody who's a deltiologist knows that. And when you turn it over, look at what he's got on it. It's a message where the writer drew a map of an airplane flight from Blois to Tours along the Loire River. Isn't that cool? And then glued it onto the postcard. It's about 40 miles between the 2 towns. And I couldn't completely decipher the message, but it looked like he was writing about 2 pilots who had flown, I think, from the opposite towns towards each other and arrived the next day. Again, I didn't get the message completely deciphered. When you realize I have about 110 slides in the presentation, and of that, probably 95 or more are postal stationery items, I didn't spend a lot of time on each one. So this one went to Corsica. The Boîte Mobile, we all realize, is the movable box that was literally taken off the post where it stood out in the street and not opened until it got into the post office. where they applied the BM to it. This is a pretty late use of the BM marking, 1911. Here's a cover that went from Tripoli to Livorno. Rather than using Italian stamps, they used French, so it must have traveled by a French ship across the Mediterranean. A very common circular date stamp for the Tripoli office. Here's a Cochin China use of the stamp with the franchise militaire overprint on it. And he had several more of these on piece. If I had a choice, I picked one that was on a cover, just because I find the covers more interesting. And he had more of these FMs used on piece. Unfortunately, they're just not as attractive. Here's a British cancel, 1912, so it's still pre-war, but it's a blind cancel used on a postcard. It was written in France and sent to England. So we assume that the cancel was applied once the postcard got to England rather than somewhere in France. It could have been applied on the boat going across the channel. Another one used in Tripoli. Now it has we've lost the border of pearls for the second class post office marking. It went to Washington, and you can see it's from the American consul, and it's a pre-printed envelope bearing the sanitary report. Presumably, like the French did, he would be reporting on yellow fever and plague and cholera and other things going on of interest to the Americans in Tripoli. A C-post cancel from the US, a duplex. So it was mailed aboard a French ship. And while it has a circular T and circle marking for postage due, there's no indication anywhere on the cover that there was postage due assessed or collected. And I don't think there should have been. I think that if they were aboard ships, the packy boat rules would cover that. In 1913, there was a philatelic exposition in Paris, and this was envelopes specially prepared for the Philatelic Expo. They were in several colors. He happened to have these two with the sewer on the two different cancels. It was the last expo, Philatelic Expo before World War I. So here's the P&T cancel. It's undated. It was used as a temporary military cancel, so it's probably late in the year. Used on the Eastern Front, and then ultimately they substituted or replaced it with the Trésor and Post cancellations that had military numbers on them, like our APOs. The red star was an early censor marking, and it meant that they didn't have to look at it beyond whatever had happened to earn the red star mark.
Does anybody know what the Evans Weekly News, stamp news was?
I don't hear any of our English friends telling us. Here's another 1913 Paris Philatelic Expo card with a nice ambulance cancel, railroad cancel to Vienna, Austria. These cards were printed in London, and I do not know why the purple cancel was applied. This is the back side of it. It's written in French, and it was just my French is poor enough that I did not take the time to translate it. You can see in the next to the last part of it down here, if my arrow is showing, he refers to the Revue Philatelique. So he's still talking about the stamp show. Champs Romain, he had a note in his folder that had this cover in it about the town of Champs Romain. There are not very many people there, 850 in 1914 and only about 300 left today. But the name kept changing. It started out, as you can see in the third bullet, Campo Romano, Campo Romain, Camp Romain, and finally Champs Romain. And in 1957, briefly, the town was renamed Uranium because they found a bunch of uranium there. I think today it is, I found it still under Champs Romain. The Lyon Expo cancel from 1914. This one not being a philatelic expo. It's a Paris Chamber of Commerce return envelope, but it has the expo, the Lyon Expo message advertising on it. And apparently what they did was they set up a temporary office at the expo and used this cancel there. This envelope, I'm pretty sure, was mailed in July 1914. I'm sorry, 1912. And it was stolen by the postman. And that's the legend that's on there. I think it'll show up on the next slide. And finally delivered in July 1914. And that's what all of this says. So the manuscript notation next to the stamp talks about the dates when it was finally delivered and when it was stolen. And the hand stamp on the right says correspondence delayed by the indiscretion of a postman.
Ken, this is Ed Grabowski. Can I jump in here?
Yes.
I'm waiting for I was waiting for this cover. This is one I remember from Jan's lecture on this issue, probably back in the late 70s. There was a postman on this route, and what he was doing was he was stealing letters with Social Security checks, so the equivalent of Social Security checks in them, and cashing them. Well, of course, all the shortages showed up in one route, so the authorities quickly recognized it was him who was stealing the checks. And so they went to his home, and being a proper member of the employee of the post office, he didn't throw out any of the envelopes from which he had taken the checks. So there were, Jan said, if I remember correctly, maybe there were about a dozen of them, and they created this hand stamp about an indiscretion of the postman that the check contents were not in the letters. So I just remember Jan talking about this, and this being one of the highlights in my book of the collection. So I'm glad you got it. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for the extra story.
And for being French, I'm going to say that the word indélicatesse, it's beautiful. And indiscretion doesn't make it justice. Doesn't do it justice. It's
No.
For a postman being not less than delicate, it's gorgeous.
Yep.
Now there's one more I'm waiting for, Ken. We'll see if you get it.
Okay. And I know we had talked in one of our previous presentations about his material that he dropped postcards from
that's the one. Yes.
Yeah, I never did find one. So all right. He did have this letter about semi-postals where a soldier, as you can see here, wrote it to an American friend. I suspect the guy was in the AEF
What?
right? Well, the AEF wouldn't have been there yet,
No,
would they?
no.
What?
So he's describing World War I has started. It's the 21st of September, 1914, and he's describing the effects of
March 13th at 11. Uh-huh.
Hello? So he's describing the effects of the war, and he's talking about the semi-postals that have been issued to support the Red Cross. And I've got all the text of his message here. And on the last page, he has 2 blocks of 4 that are canceled, talking about the provisional issue on the top with the surcharge, and then the final definitive that was issued with the design changed and the value, the stamp value moved to the upper left corner and the surcharge added in the lower left corner. Now, here's a packy boat from, I think, Venezuela to Ecuador. I am not positive of that, but that was the best I could figure out when I was looking at the material and trying to figure out from the internet what town it might have originated in. But the card never got to France, but it carried 10 centimes postage from France, presumably because it was carried on a French ship between the 2 towns. Here's a letter to Geneva, and on the face, there was no postage. It is the address to the Prisoner of War Agency in October 1914, marked on the back, 10 centimes postage due. I'm sorry, not 10 centimes, but the letter rate into Switzerland would have been more than 10 centimes, which probably should have been 25. And there's a Geneva receipt, so we know it got that far, but there's no indication that they ever actually collected the postage due. Here's the 3 French generals, Castelnau, Joffre, and Pau. And the postcard, this is one of the first ones I picked up, and it was one I spent way too much time on, as you can see from the notes here. It went to Neufmanil in Ardennes with an added German occupation near Pontarlier, but that's not where Neufmanil is. So I'm not quite sure where this postcard went before it got to Paris. But the writer himself says he's near Chalon-sur-Marne, so that was somewhere else again. A very unusual card. Here's the Lyon Expo again, the same French Paris envelope, but this was all canceled after, well, the second one is canceled after the expo closed. This letter went to Geneva, the Association des Dames Françaises, the Association of French Women, right? Was founded in 1879 as an adjunct to the Red Cross, and eventually it was absorbed by the Red Cross itself, and it helped people during wartime. This cancel was special because early in the war, they were collecting all the mail in a couple of places if it was intended to go to somebody in the army or coming from somebody, written by somebody in the army, carried by train and put together or assembled, brought to a point in Paris where it was then redistributed to the addressee, whether it was going towards the front for the soldiers or coming back from the soldiers and going to the civilians. Here's a Field Service British cancel used on a 10-cent French 10 centimes stamp. Rather unusual. Went to London, no postage due indicated. Here's the back side of the card. It looks like a POW card, right? All he can do is say I'm well or I'm not so well and cross out things that don't apply and so on. $1915, here's a late use of the Peace and Commerce stamp, added to make the 25 centimes rate to England. Those stamps had actually been retired in 1900, so they weren't demonetized, just retired. And it may be that somebody couldn't find a 5 centime stamp, Sower stamp to add to this. And you can see it's going to the colonial stamp market.
But it's the same name, Evans, that you had in the prior card.
Yes, it
earlier.
is. The stamp newspaper.
Yeah.
Well, they would have known to save all their envelopes, right? So here's the first of the Treasure and Post, this one numeral 34. And again, he didn't make any effort to collect every numeral or anything like that. He looked more for interesting censor markings and so on. So there's a 2-line censorship marking on here. The soldiers were allowed 2 stamps or 2 franked letters per month. And if they wanted to send more, they had to pay the postage. So because this went beyond the French metropole to London, the soldier had to pay the postage. Here's another indication of this, what they call central assembly station for the mail, where it was collected in one place and then parceled out for ultimate distribution. I assume that had something to do with making the censorship easier, but I'm not positive of that. Certainly it was a way to hide where the soldiers were stationed out in the field. So here's an envelope from Alsace to the famous Mr. Forbin, the philatelist in Paris. The French forces had recaptured the Upper Rhine from the Germans at this point and opened a post office in Thann, Alsace. The mayoral hand stamps were on there just to say, hey, we're back and we're French and we're proud of it. So they put their marks on the envelope as well as the stamps. It was pretty typical, having had a couple of Forbin covers in my collection over the years from the colonies. Over-franking was pretty typical of his mail. Here's another Alsatian envelope that again got the mayoral stamps on it, this time paying correct postage. And a third one that was just a matter of somebody saying, if you can find a rubber stamp in your desk, put it on this envelope, please. Another Central Assembly for soldiers' mail, indicating that this all came into one place and then got forwarded to the soldiers from there or coming back. This one was coming back. There's a British Army CDS on the stamp and a British censor marking on the envelope, even though it was presumably used in France on mail to Paris. A censored cover to England with a more typical, at this point, censor indication with the tape across the top, having been opened and then resealed. And the censor himself had his own hand stamp that had his name on it, although it wasn't his full name. This was a purple square censor marking and then the circular control postile mark in the middle of the letter. Censor tape across the top one more time. And Jan noted that this stamp was from the 1907 booklet Pain. Oh, I misspelled semi-postal, sorry. Here's the 30 centimes postage paid into Switzerland. And I again suspect they're booklet stamps because of the margins across the bottom. This went to Pas de Calais and then came back. And it's an kind of an unusual cancel to see a roller used on these. They were mostly struck by a CDS and not a roller. And here's all the marks on the back showing when it was, where it was, and where it went and when.
But you had a cancel on the front that said lieu de destination envahi. So the destination was invaded,
Oh.
which is probably why
Oh.
it was returned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I wasn't paying attention when I was doing that. This letter card mailed to London, still for only 10 centimes. And when I opened it up, I could not read it, which meant to me that it was probably written in Flemish. It didn't appear to be German. It certainly wasn't French or English. So that was my best guess. Here's the Red Cross booklet stamp again. And Belfort was part of France after the Franco-Prussian War. Even though it was in the neighborhood of things that didn't remain part of France. So here's a card from the International Office of Feminist Intelligence. It's in, it went to Boron, which is in Northeast France, even though down at the bottom it says, I think, near Lyon, but I didn't find any town near Lyon that matched this. So
There should be a town called Bron,
oh, B-R-O-U.
B-R-O-N,
B-R-O-N.
I
So it
think,
wasn't, okay.
or Brew, B-R-O-U.
And
Yeah.
that would have been near Lyon then.
Yeah,
Okay,
Lyon, Bron, yeah, Bron, I think.
yep. So this group seems to be in the business of relocating people who were displaced by World War I. And that's what all the message has to tell us. And here's the message side of the card. I note that it's numbered and dated, and it's got an August and a September date on it. So I'm not sure what all of that means. And I wasn't studying every piece thoroughly. And this one, I even got the town wrong. I'm going to make a note about that because I want to correct them.
And the town is Bron, B-R-O-N.
Okay. All right. I'll fix that before we put it on the web, the PowerPoint. Here's a Bordeaux Bourse, which is from the redesigned Red Cross booklet. This, in addition to the assembly point for mail in Paris, there was another one in Marseille that they used for mail going out to Navy, naval, they're not soldiers, Navy guys, seamen. And they used a similar marking, the Postis Naval. This was, an example of the Serbian post, and I'll have some more of those either this time or maybe in the next slide presentation, but I know I've got more of the Serbian post. And talk a little bit more about the history of how it happened. 1917. These two towns are so close together that they now actually have been merged. The letter rate had gone from 10 to 15 centimes, and you can see the T on the 5 centimes sower. The rate had just gone up 6 days before, so maybe they were still being gentle about collecting the additional 5 centimes and not doubling the shortage. Oh, and Bruneval. I just happened to have read a book. What was it called? Operation Biting? Something like that. In World War II, the Europeans in general were all working on radar. It had been, I don't know, there was a form of it in use, but it wasn't very effective yet. They had trouble with distance and they had trouble with height and so on. But they could at least, they were starting to see blips on a screen. And the British, during the initial part of the war, were very suspicious of something going on on the northeast coast of France, because their planes were detected sooner. There were German fighters in the air sooner than they should have been if they were relying purely on sight to recognize when the Brits were coming. And they realized that there was something radar-like going on in Bruneval, and they trained, I forget how many it was, 120 paratroopers, I want to say, and dropped them into Bruneval with the objective of stealing the appropriate parts of the German radar. They didn't need the antenna, for example, but they needed the guts of it, and spiriting it to the coast where they would be picked up by the British Navy and hauled back to Britain. And it actually worked. They did successfully bring the right piece of the equipment back to England, where they were able to figure out what the Germans were doing and how it was different from the British approach to radar. It cost them a couple of their soldiers, a few were killed, a couple of Germans were killed, and a couple were taken prisoner. But it was a really interesting story, and I just happened to read the book as I picked this cover up and realized what Bruneval represented in World War II. But it's right on the English Channel.
I read that book too.
It's an interesting story, isn't it?
It is.
Did I leave out anything important?
I don't think so. There was one part, didn't some of the guys end up lost their weapons, and they were wandering around trying to get back together without weapons.
Yes. Yep. Here's a local use. Now it's February and they're not as forgiving. So the rate's gone up to 15 cents and they had to pay the double the shortage, but they're still using a sower stamp for postage due. March 1917, I think this was mailed from Indochina or perhaps on a ship coming back from there with the Yokohama Marseille Maritime Council. There's a Singapore transit mark you can see there, nice round double circle. And it's written in some Scandinavian language, but I don't know whether it was Norwegian, Swedish, or Danish. And of course, I can't read the Chinese chops either, or the Japanese chops, whichever it is. Here's a real pretty hotel corner card from Algeria, my favorite, to Munich. What I couldn't understand was why it wasn't censored. Sent registered and canceled in Biskra, but then yeah, oh, I know it's a front only, so I don't know what the heck would have been on the back. There could have been censor markings on the back, I guess, but I would have expected a piece of tape. Here's a Belgian military cancel used on a French postcard, mailed to London. And again, it's not written in French or English, so I'm assuming it was written in Flemish. Here's a censored cover from March 1918, and it went all the way to New Zealand. Isn't that cool? A British censor, and there's tape across the top that's no longer on the front. I think it's on the back. And one thing, I have an Algerian cover from the mid 1800s that went to New Zealand also. And if you go online, the New Zealanders have put many, if not all, of their newspapers online, searchable, and it's free. So if Miss E. Kerr was there in 1918 and there was any reason for her to be in the newspaper, back even when they were using things like Ms. Kerr arrived from, or Ms. Kerr went to the dentist this week, kind of items in there, you can probably figure out who she is or where she lived and so on. Here's the back. So yeah, the tape on the top has been removed from the front of the envelope, but it's still on the back, and the French censor on the right side. There's a morning cover that noted that Lille had been liberated by the British. And I could not read the date even when I used a glass, and I have only the front, so I'm not positive when it was mailed or when it got to Rouen. Now we have a card that's canceled on November 11th, 1918, and we all know why that's significant. The sender probably did not write the address on here just because the handwriting doesn't seem to match. And you'll notice the mix of French and Belgian stamps as well. This is the message on the back. And again, I don't know what language that is, but it does not look German to me. And who knows if it was a favor cancel or some kind of special philatelic souvenir, just that that it was 11 o'clock in the morning on the 11th of November and so on. All right, German postmark from Mulhouse, and this was during the time when France was reasserting control over Alsace, so they didn't have a French cancel yet. And Kindler made the note on the page that had this cover on it that said there wasn't much mail at this time coming out of Alsace. Here's a mix of German and French postage. out of Lorraine. And again, a German cancel used. Parcel receipt, right? Again, a German postmark on Metz, from Metz rather. It's all French postage this time. And I'm guessing it went to a Legionnaire because it was addressed into City Bell Ab, if you see right below the blue stamp on the right side there, which was their headquarters. Here's a little bitty envelope where somebody cut the 10 centimes off a postcard and glued it on the envelope. Probably a second use, just because the cancel doesn't seem to match. Well, no, maybe not. It was unused. Hard to say. But it wasn't proper, whatever it was. And here's a YMCA return envelope, censored, a 1903 stamp, the lined sewer, passed by the censor, and the chaplain in the lower left says it's okay. Going to American Express. Maybe Cary Grant showed up to pick it up. Another YMCA cover, 25 centimes rate because it's coming to the United States. And Jan says that it was canceled by, the stamps are canceled by the military post office. But I put a glass to it and it wasn't clear to me. A nice postcard of the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Canceled on the day the treaty was signed, not the ceasefire in November 18. Another postcard, the same special cancel, the Peace Congress. Couple of U.S. Army Post Office cancels. Notice the July is upside down. And again, he has pieces cut out of postcards and not the whole thing. This one, he's got the whole thing pretty clearly philatelic. Got a nice label tying everything together. The month has been turned right side up. The picture side is a 48-star flag. Many of us, if not all of us, can remember that. Here's the victory party in July 1919. The card was not mailed. You can see it's an octagon cancel, and I'm not sure what it is. I can read the date, but I can't read anything else. But it's canceled on the same day the photo was taken. So again, I don't know if that's on a handback or favor or philatelic or not. These are stamps that were canceled at the frontier, used in 1918 and 1920. But it's German railroad cancels, not French cancels. My down arrow stopped working. There we go. There's another roller cancel, but this was the cancel that the savings bank used and not the post office, although they were in the same place. So it's not that surprising, but it's the only one I saw in his collection. I expect most of us have seen stamps canceled like this just because it happened from time to time. Here's Saint Address again. I cropped the card to get the message on here. The Belgian government in exile had been in Normandy, and they set up a post office in 1914. So I put a hot link in here to Wikipedia, where they talk about the post office being its Saint address, if you care to know more about it. Here's a Constantinople to Boston. The return marking, or the sender marking, being Missions of Something Bible Society in Constantinople. Mailed to Boston with the equivalent of an APO cancel again, but now post-war. Uh-oh. I forgot to change the picture. I gotta fix that. That shouldn't be what you're looking at. I'll fix that. Maybe I'll copy the slide into the remaining show, and then you'll be able to see that too. Here's Cilicia stamps or surcharges done for the Near East, mailed to Thompsonville, Connecticut. It seemed to be from a wife to a husband, but it's not perfectly clear that that's what's going on. But there is same last name, from Mrs. to Mr. So that's why I guessed it was husband and wife. National Bank of Turkey return envelope with the military APO style cancel on it. Here's an envelope out of Smyrna. Again, the APO style cancel. And it is interesting to me that the registry label is 528 Trezor and Post, as is the cancel. So, folks, I'll have to admit, I cannot read Arabic, whether it's printed or handwritten. So I have no idea where that went. Fortunately, the word Adana is in regular lettering, so I could read that. But it took a long time to get there. You can see it was canceled December 29th. And the arrival marking is January. Oh, you know what? I screwed it up. It's my American in me. It's January 6th. I'll take that comment out and fix it. All right, February 17th, 1921. Nice maritime marking on an envelope that went to Boston in a packy boat stationery envelope. Pretty fun. This is a use of memo stamps mailed to Vienna, right? Here are stamps of clearly two different printings on a postcard, because their colors are obviously different even in my scan, which is kind of unusual. A lot of times those don't show up very well, but it did this time. Here's another Cilicia envelope. Went to London and then got forwarded. How's that for a philatelic item? Clearly a postcard. Lots of stamps on it. This one, I could not read the date, but it is out of Syria. Nice picture of street scene from Beirut. The stamp is tied by the cancel, but there's no address or message. So it was a handbag, a souvenir. And this is the last one. This one went to Canada from Paris, 1928. So it's getting pretty late to see the sewer stamps in use. And you see at the lower left, the seal of the general receiver of postal items seized during the war. And now, 10 years later, presumably what they did was they had a piece of mail in here that was being forwarded to the ultimate recipient, the original recipient. And it's kind of fun to have all those stamps on there paying the postage, but it's a combination of 3 different issues, effectively. Very cool. So that's it. Basically, it's chronological. A lot of it was out of Kindler's notes. A lot of it was research that I did. I looked up a few rates in Richardson, but I wasn't, again, as I said, I just couldn't spend the time to turn every cover into something that was like an exhibit piece. I will do one more presentation on Kindler's stuff, and there will be some sewer material in there, but a lot of it is, just to give you an idea, there's Confederate States, U.S. Confederate States postal history. There's the sewer, one of the rare sewer booklets, the Eglon booklet, which Mick Bister helped me out with. Oh gosh, it's just a real mishmash of things at this point. The remainder of his collection of philatelic items. So, anybody have any questions or want to go back and look at anything at this point?
Yes, Ken, can I just say something about that address? Got some notes down here. Can't read my own writing now. Oh yes, an envelope or a couple of envelopes that were addressed to what looked like Evans Stamp Monthly, whatever it
Yes.
was. It's in fact Ewan's. It's a Welsh name. It's a Welsh version of a Welsh name. It's EWENS, and he was a stamp magazine publisher between 1899 and 1922. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was a complete collection of his magazines put on auction by a company called Lot Art. I've not heard of them, Lot Art, but I couldn't find out what their price was. But that clearly is the period of his operation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Dan, I point out that several of those envelopes from Tripoli, they seem to have been like roughly 1912. That would have been perhaps in connection with the Italian war against the Ottomans, where the Italians attacked North Africa. And I was just checking Wikipedia that said that the Italians captured Tripoli in October 1911. So I don't quite know what the French have got to do with it, but that's about the same time as there was a war going on in North Africa.
Huh.
That some would say was kind of the precursor to the war the big war a couple of years later.
Sounds like it. I'll go back and see if there's anything I should fold into the comments about those covers. Thanks, Dan.
The Vatican has issued an
Anything else?
Well, just one comment that if you are interested in sewer stamps, I mean, there is a current sale from Ceres that has some material from the Roma collection. There is some really nice varieties. So take a look.
Okay.
Make sure that you're aware.
Very good. All right. I can't remember if we have an April program scheduled yet or not. If not, I'll have to. I'm sorry, March program. This is still February. And we should have one in April as well. I may do that last Kindler presentation in April because, like I said, I want to be sure and have it before the auction. I'm sorry I missed the show until last month, but couldn't be helped. I was at least at a stamp show. So, anything else for the good of the order today? If you haven't paid your dues, be sure and do that.
Well, talking of stamp show, I was in San Diego yesterday, and Leland Wolf sent his regards.
Oh. Yeah, Leland Wolf is on our board, so.
Yes, but he told me I can never go to the meetings because the timing is not right for me. And today he's at the stamp show, you know, trying to sell some of his stamps. So
Good. All right, well, we'll have a program 4 weeks from today. And we'll do another one in April, and then we'll take May off because of the Memorial Day holiday here in the United States. So we'll see you in 4 weeks for something fun. And if we already know what it is and I've forgotten, it wouldn't be the first time. But I thank all of you for coming today, and we'll see you in a month.
Bye-bye.
thank you. Take care, guys.
Bye now.
Well,
Thanks, Ken.
Bye, everyone.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Take care.
Enjoy that.
well done.
Thank you.